Cheers. Hi everyone, yeah, I'm Finlay. I'm at the Strathclyde Business School. It's a real pleasure to be here today and to hear about all the different projects and technical challenges that are being addressed within this group. I'm going to talk about sort of a different perspective on mine water as a technology and its development, focusing on the kind of social and economic aspects and how we sort of participate as communities, as societies in technologies for not only a sustainable natural environment, but also for achieving sustainable communities as well. So my project is based in Scotland, but obviously there's a lot of lessons across the rest of the UK and indeed the world. I think it's important to refocus why we think about non-technical challenges for mine water. When we discuss energy, we're obviously talking about an interaction and a use of a resource by people. It's possible to get lost in the technical design, efficiency, scientific inquiry, but really we're talking about heating, cooking, light, comfort, employment, generating wealth for a community. So these systems are socio-technical in nature, and we need to readdress balances between the physical and social sides of energy. We also know that technocratic governance approaches are not delivering on a transition at the rate and scale required. We can see from experience that getting more and better scientific information and just throwing it out there doesn't necessarily work for system change. We can think about how long we've known about the impact of CO2 emissions, the amount of COPs we've had, and we're still, drastically behind where we'd like to be from environmental sustainability perspective. And yet at the same time, social sustainability is radically under-addressed. Inequalities deepening and fuel poverty is being experienced really harshly, obviously, in the last couple of years, particularly highlighting that. So all of these energy resources, they have a place, they have a community and a context, and we need to develop new social economic frameworks that take that into account in its core if we want to truly deliver on long-term sustainability for our societies and for our economies. Scotland's coalfields, again, similar lessons to the rest of the UK, but these were areas at the forefront of energy and industry across the 20th century, and the cultural heritage of that is still very much felt. When we think about the kind of transitions required in the fossil fuel industry today, we can actually take lessons from the earlier periods of transition within the coal industry, across the 1950s through to the 1970s, where transition was somewhat managed, job losses and colliery closures were secured through negotiation with workers as well as communities, and economic stability to regions was actually provided through alternative employment and transferring up to high productivity pits in some cases. Obviously that changed drastically in the 80s and 90s. So the point there is just to illustrate that there really is a choice when we do about how we approach local economic development. We have to learn from the legacies and harms of the past, and that political economy is something we can very much engage with as developers within the ecosystem. So yeah, we have the Scottish Index for Multiple Deprivation map on the right there, which really just highlights the sort of legacies socioeconomically and in health that communities experience today from different types of transition in the past, and these are issues that we really need to be addressing when we develop mine water technology. So my research agenda is trying to deal with these socio-economic, cultural and political forces that are at play. How are we going to tackle the kind of structural challenges I've sort of spoke about there and develop co-beneficiary solutions, and integrate thinking from areas such as the just transition and community wealth building. Obviously in Scotland specifically, we actually have policy support for those areas, but we don't know how that looks on the ground when we bring together communities, enterprise and local government through models that we can actually implement through business, governance, finance and so on. We also know that generally geothermal energy, in particular mine water, is chronically understudied from a social science perspective compared to other energy technologies, particularly around issues of access, ownership, participation. So there's a lot of learning to be done there. And again, yeah, there's just a lack of how we actually transition these ideals into business models, into practice on the ground. So as a starting place, we can think about these two sort of approaches to the role of energy in society. We have energy justice, which has three kind of theoretical pillars, which can then be implemented in practice. Distributive justice is talking about the distribution of impacts, benefits, costs across society. Procedural justice is about decision-making processes, about inclusivity, participation, and how that's done equitably. And restorative justice thinks about recognising the communities and people and businesses that are important and relevant for energy development, as well as a kind of restoration around ongoing and past harms and how they can be addressed for a sustainable solution to go forward. And then we have the ladder of participation on the right there, which just sort of really illustrates how we move away from kind of tokenism and non-meaningful consultation into partnerships and genuine power in local areas. Obviously, participation isn't a neutral concept. It's deliberately promoting democracy and citizenship. And we know from other technologies that tokenism and other forms of non-engagement actually have a lasting impact on the long-term perceptions of different technologies, and there's no reason that that can't happen for mine water as well as it has in other net zero and also fossil fuel technologies. So the point is, if we can sort of recenter a people-centered approach for these technologies, we can promote more sustainable practices through transparency, openness, honesty, and community involvement in the earlier stages of larger projects. And that's done through meaningful engagement and participation. So think about how we try to start to bridge the gap between these ideals and business models and the innovation that's required there. Just two examples that already exist within kind of practice and then with academic literature as well. The social stakeholder canvas is a way to think about the different social impacts and benefits that a project may have. This is not energy specific. And the key kind of highlight there is that we often separate governance, finance, and the business models, and they are separate, but they are also inherently interconnected. And in fact, they very much shape one another in a very strong way. And my sort of take so far from research is that governance is actually the area we need to focus on, because that really bleeds into everything else and shapes the rest of the project, and also provides that kind of long-term anchoring and sustainability for communities. And on the right, we just have an example of sort of a framework that might be suitable, setting up a special purpose vehicle for these kind of mine work projects, which involve collaboration between local government, community, and industry itself for mixed finance and mixed governance models. I've sort of didn't want to highlight a particular project here or overwhelm it with text, but I'm sort of building this typology of looking at current best practice in community-oriented energy projects and thinking about how we can map different justice aspects to different parts of the project delivery. So just highlighting there, when we're thinking about procedural justice, which is about decision-making and inclusion and participation, does the finance model have a community share offer? I've just thought today that Ripple Energy, who are based in the UK, has a 10% reserved for local communities, community members to invest and have a share of that project. When we're thinking about distributed justice, we can think about the process of the project design phase, and engagement and participation in that requires costs, whether that's capacity, time, money. How can we navigate that in a fair and equitable way? And how do we actually define who is the relevant community? What sort of aspects of culture, place, and interest are relevant there? And do projects align with community wealth building pillars, which is ultimately about keeping wealth inside communities rather than being extracted to, say, shareholders in faraway lands? So thinking about how can we make financial power work for local places. So this is sort of the foundation I'm hoping to have built on these frameworks and be able to sort of make them public in the coming year. So very quickly, just to think about what I'm doing, I'm going to be very much embedding myself in these mining areas, speaking with stakeholders and community members to sort of draw out those key challenges around participation, and then building on to how we can actually create these participatory business models that work for mine water and work for long-term social sustainability in these communities. And then again, following that up by developing contributions and tests within the policy landscape. How if things are not quite yet feasible, what sort of policy support, what changes are necessary in the wider landscape. Yeah, so just to sort of re-emphasize that, it's about developing energy resources with place-based approaches, collaborative, inclusive business model frameworks, bringing together your public, private, and communities as partners, and to produce those digestible outputs that communities can use, but also policymakers and industry. We absolutely have the technical capabilities to transform energy systems, but we don't want to be left with more legacies and problems as we move forward in this net zero transition. So thanks for listening. That's me, and happy to have a wee chat about any questions now.